Something strange happened the night Rick didn't come back home. The garage, usually buzzing with half-finished gadgets and the faint smell of chemicals, was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a loose light bulb. Morty leaned against the doorway, shoulders stiff from a long day, and realized he hadn't felt this kind of quiet in a long time. It wasn't the absence of noise that made it strange. It was the way the quiet seemed alive, like it was waiting, breathing slowly around him. Somewhere deep in the corners of the room, shadows curled softly, and for a moment he thought he could hear the faint pulse of the universe itself, soft and deliberate. And in that quiet, I want you to remember something, listener. You are seen. You are cared for. This story is for you, and right now, as you settle into your bed or your chair, or wherever you are, we love you. We truly do. The small moments, the tiredness you carry, the little sighs you give when the day ends. All of it matters. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Morty's eyes drifted to the mess of papers and strange devices scattered across the workbench. None of it was functioning tonight. Or maybe it was functioning in ways he didn't understand. A small, glowing fragment hovered above a half-assembled portal gun, vibrating gently like it was humming its own lullaby. He reached out a hand, but the fragment shivered and darted away, leaving behind a faint trail of sparkling dust that lingered in the air, floating lazily like a cloud suspended in the light. It was strange how small things could feel so important. He thought about the star fragment, the humming, and how he could almost feel it trying to tell him something, though he couldn't quite hear it. And in that uncertainty there was a strange comfort, a quiet reminder that sometimes things didn't need to make sense. Sometimes they just needed to exist, softly, patiently, like a gentle pulse in the night. Morty walked slowly around the garage, letting his fingers brush against objects he usually ignored. A wrench that had rolled under the bench, a cracked beaker still smelling faintly of yesterday's experiment, a notebook full of diagrams he didn't understand. Everything seemed slightly different tonight, softer somehow, touched by a quiet magic that made the air feel warmer. Even the faint smell of ozone didn't irritate his nose. It was almost like the universe had softened its edges, letting him breathe easier, letting him sink into the moment. The hum of the fragment grew slightly louder as he moved. He watched it hover in midair, circling the half-assembled portal gun. And then, just as quietly as it had arrived, it floated into a small crack in the wall, disappearing entirely. Morty blinked, and he felt that familiar tug of curiosity mixed with the weight of something he couldn't name. It was the same feeling he had when Rick first taught him about portal physics. Not the fear, but the wonder, the quiet awe that left your chest both heavy and light at the same time. He sighed, letting himself settle onto a stool near the workbench. The night had deepened outside, and through the dusty window he could see faint stars peeking out from the edges of clouds. The kind of stars that seemed to wink at you quietly, like old friends who had stories but didn't need to tell them all at once. And for some reason, Morty felt like those stars understood him. They understood the nervous energy he carried, the small bursts of courage he sometimes forgot to acknowledge, the little sparks of hope he held on to, even when things felt overwhelmingly strange. Rick's absence hung in the air, but not as a threat. It was a pause, a gentle holding of breath, giving Morty the space to notice things he had overlooked before. The way the shadows leaned against the walls, the way the light from a single lamp stretched across the floor like a lazy river, the way the air itself seemed soft, almost like it had been waiting for someone to finally notice it. He reached for a small notebook Rick had left open, pages curling at the edges. It was filled with cryptic notes, sketches of machinery that seemed impossible, and tiny scribbles in the margins. Most of it made no sense, but one line caught his eye. Sometimes the universe is quieter than you think, and that's when it tells its secrets. Morty stared at the words, and for a moment, the noise in his mind quieted, settling into a rhythm that matched the hum of the fragment earlier. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the soft, low energy of the room wash over him. He thought about Rick, floating somewhere in the fractured universe, doing whatever it was that brought him here and there, yet leaving pieces of himself behind for Morty to find. It wasn't just a lesson in science or adventure. It was a lesson in noticing, in understanding, in being open to the small wonders that whispered themselves to those willing to look. Morty leaned back against the stool, letting his shoulders relax. He imagined himself drifting slowly through a universe stitched together by quiet fragments, soft lights, and gentle hums. He imagined being weightless, carried by the pulse of distant stars, feeling small but not insignificant. And in that moment, he understood that Rick's absence wasn't emptiness. It was an invitation, a chance to slow down, to notice the universe in its quieter forms, to grow quietly, softly, without rushing. And, somewhere in the back of his mind, a soft lullaby seemed to hum, faint and imperfect, like it had been pieced together from the fragments of countless nights like this. It was a song of small wonders, of moments that mattered more than any loud adventure, of quiet courage found in observing, in feeling, in caring. Morty let himself sink into that lullaby, letting it carry him gently, one note at a time, until the world outside and the world inside softened into a seamless, warm quiet. He didn't know what awaited him beyond the next fragment, the next whisper, the next gentle anomaly of the fractured universe. But he didn't need to know yet. He only needed to rest, to breathe, to let the quiet teach him what it would, in its own slow, deliberate way. And as his eyes began to close, a faint smile touched his lips. Somewhere out there, Rick's hum would meet the fragment's light. And somewhere, Morty thought, everything was unfolding exactly as it should, soft and slow, patient and kind. The next morning was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the universe had held its breath overnight and was now letting the air settle slowly around the Smith house. Sunlight seeped through the blinds in thin golden stripes, touching the floor with a warmth that seemed almost intentional, as if it had waited for Morty to wake and notice it. He rolled out of bed, stretching his arms lazily, and felt the lingering hum of last night's strange fragment still inside his chest. It was subtle, a soft pulse he could barely name, but it made him feel alive in a way that words often failed to capture. He wandered toward the garage, where yesterday's fragment had disappeared into a crack in the wall. The air felt different this morning, softer, almost anticipatory. Morty's fingers brushed against the edges of tools and scattered papers as he moved, letting his mind drift along the gentle rhythm of quiet discovery. And then he saw it. A small, glowing fragment hovering just above the floor, not moving like it had before, but pulsing gently, almost like a heartbeat. It blinked at him, faint and uncertain, and Morty realized he felt a strange protectiveness he hadn't expected. The fragment seemed fragile, yet it carried a quiet strength, a reminder that even the smallest things could matter in ways that weren't immediately obvious. He reached out slowly, careful not to startle it, and the fragment drifted closer, letting him sense a soft warmth in its light. "Hey," Morty whispered, unsure why he felt the need to speak. The fragment didn't reply, at least not in words, but he could feel it responding in its own subtle way, like a song too faint for ears but not for the heart. He smiled softly, realizing that this small, floating piece of light carried a lesson he had never expected to learn. Attention, care, and quiet presence could shape the universe as much as adventure or science could. He spent the morning following the fragment through the garage, tracing its slow, deliberate movements, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. Each time it hovered near a strange tool or a sketch Rick had left, Morty noticed details he had overlooked before: a faint scratch on a workbench, the subtle curl of paper edges, the way dust floated lazily in the streams of sunlight. Every little observation felt important, as though the fragment itself was teaching him to see the small wonders the world often hid. By mid-morning, Morty had grown brave enough to speak aloud his thoughts, talking softly to the fragment as if it were an old friend. "Do you like it here?" he asked. "Or do you want to be somewhere else?" The fragment pulsed in response, a rhythm that felt like acknowledgement. Morty realized he didn't always need answers. Sometimes just noticing, just caring, was enough. Outside the garage, the world continued on quietly. Birds sang faintly, a car hummed down the street, and somewhere, Beth was probably worrying about Rick. But inside the garage, time seemed suspended, held together by the fragment's gentle glow and the slow, deliberate rhythm of curiosity. Morty followed it around a pile of half-finished inventions, noticing that some of the objects seemed to shimmer faintly in response to his attention. He felt a strange, warm sense of connection to the things he touched, as if observing them kindly was a quiet form of creation in itself. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had a soft, fluid quality in the presence of the fragment. Morty discovered that when he concentrated, the fragment would hover near objects that reminded him of small, kind acts in his own life. A crumpled note he had once written to his sister, a broken toy he had tried to fix, a faintly scuffed book. Each pulsed briefly with light when he noticed them, and with each pulse, Morty felt a gentle reassurance, a soft reminder that growth often happened quietly, in unnoticed, tender moments as the afternoon sun drifted lower. Morty realized he could almost hear faint voices within the fragment's glow, tiny whispers of encouragement, soft and melodic. They didn't form words he could understand, not exactly, but he felt them speaking directly to his heart. Pay attention. Be kind. Notice the small things. They matter. Morty smiled again, feeling a warmth spread through his chest, a slow, gentle contentment that made the day feel longer and softer all at once. He wandered further into the garage, discovering a small hidden door he had never noticed before, partially obscured by crates of old inventions. The fragment floated toward it, pulsing slightly, inviting him. Morty hesitated, then reached for the knob. It turned easily in his hand, and he stepped through into a space he had never imagined, a tiny, softly glowing room, filled with faintly floating motes of light that drifted like dust in sunlight. The fragment hovered in the center, its glow reflecting against the walls, and Morty felt like he had stepped into a secret universe of his own making. Inside the room, the fragment began to move in slow, deliberate patterns, tracing arcs and circles that felt almost like a dance. Morty followed, his own movements soft and unhurried, as if he were learning a rhythm he had always known but forgotten. The space seemed alive, responding to his presence in a gentle, intuitive way. He reached out to touch one of the drifting motes of light, and it lingered against his fingers for a brief moment, leaving a faint warmth behind. Morty sat down on the floor, letting the fragment hover above him, feeling a profound sense of peace. He thought about Rick, about the fractured universes and strange adventures that awaited him, and realized that the most important journeys sometimes happened quietly in moments like this. He didn't need to understand everything. He didn't need to solve every problem. Sometimes it was enough to notice, to care, to be present. The sun outside began to dip below the horizon, casting soft, golden light across the room. The fragment pulsed gently one last time, hovering over Morty's shoulder as if to say, You are ready to rest now." Morty smiled softly, letting his eyes close, feeling the warmth of the fragment settle into the quiet spaces of his mind. And as he drifted into a slow, unhurried rest, he felt the pulse of the fractured universe echo softly within him, a gentle rhythm that would carry him through the night and into tomorrow. Somewhere, beyond the edges of the garage, the universe continued on its quiet, deliberate path. And somewhere, Morty realized, he was learning how to move along with it, softly, attentively, and with a gentle heart. The day after discovering the secret room, Morty found himself wandering through the garage more slowly, more deliberately. Each object he touched seemed to hum softly beneath his fingers, like tiny, forgotten hearts, still beating after years of neglect. The sunlight spilled unevenly across the floor, catching motes of dust that floated lazily in the air. It was quiet, but not empty. The space was alive in its stillness, as though every tool, every sketch, every stray piece of wire carried a memory of something gentle, something worth noticing. The fragment had returned, pulsing softly above a stack of half-assembled machines. It moved in a deliberate pattern, tracing lines and curves in the air, almost like a painter working on an invisible canvas. Morty followed it, letting the rhythm guide his attention, letting his mind slow to match the soft cadence. The fragment's glow reflected off the metal surfaces of the garage, scattering light like tiny stars caught in slow orbit. And in that quiet scattering, Morty felt a strange kinship with the universe. Small, tentative, yet undeniably connected to something vast and gentle. As he walked, he noticed small, forgotten spaces in the garage that he had never truly looked at before. A dusty jar of screws, a tangle of wires, a cracked beaker, all pulsed faintly in response to his attention. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made him feel that he mattered here, that his care and observation could coax beauty and life out of even the smallest, most overlooked corners. The fragment floated near each object, hovering as though to encourage him to look more closely, to notice the soft pulse of possibility that existed everywhere if you paused long enough to see it. Morty's mind drifted back to the floating garden he had imagined in the secret room. He realized that this garage, with its scattered tools and faintly humming fragment, was like a miniature universe in itself. Quiet, strange, full of small wonders waiting to be discovered. Every shadow, every slant of light, every whisper of movement seemed to carry meaning. And for the first time, Morty felt a deep sense of satisfaction in noticing these things, in letting his attention linger on the small details rather than rushing past them. The fragment guided him toward a small, worn toolbox tucked in the corner. Morty knelt and opened it slowly. Inside were tools he didn't recognize, each one humming faintly as though it remembered something he had forgotten. A tiny wrench seemed to pulse gently in his hand. A set of screwdrivers shimmered faintly, almost like they were breathing. Morty realized he could feel a connection between himself and these objects, a thread of quiet awareness that made him feel less alone. He traced his fingers over their surfaces, feeling warmth where there should have been cold metal, and understood that small acts of attention could awaken life even in the most ordinary places. He set the tools aside carefully, then noticed a pile of crumpled sketches Rick had left on the workbench. They were full of strange diagrams and impossible geometries, but as he looked closer, Morty saw subtle patterns he had never noticed before. The lines seemed to move gently under his gaze, rearranging themselves into shapes that felt familiar, almost comforting. He realized that even in chaos there was rhythm and order, soft and patient, waiting for someone to notice. The fragment hovered above the sketches, pulsing with a quiet glow that felt like encouragement, like a gentle reminder that observation itself was a form of care. The afternoon stretched lazily, filled with soft light and the low hum of the fragment. Morty wandered further into the garage, discovering spaces he had never explored. A cupboard full of jars that glittered like tiny galaxies. A shelf of worn books that seemed to whisper their stories when touched. A crate of old gadgets that hummed faintly like tiny hearts, still beating in the quiet. Each discovery made him feel a little more connected, a little more capable of noticing the beauty in small, unexpected places. He began to understand that the universe wasn't only vast and strange, it was also intimate, delicate, and patient. At some point, Morty realized he had been following the fragment for hours without noticing. He paused to sit on the floor, letting the light wash over him, and felt a slow, steady calm seep into his chest. The fragment hovered above him, pulsing softly, as if to say that being present was enough. And for the first time, Morty didn't feel the need to fix anything, to understand everything, or to rush. He simply breathed, let the quiet envelop him, and allowed the moment to exist fully, without judgment or expectation. In that stillness, the garage began to feel like more than just a room. It was a world within a world, a place where small acts of attention and care could ripple outward, shaping reality in ways that were invisible but no less real. Morty imagined himself walking through tiny universes tucked inside each object, each shadow, each corner. The fragment guided him softly, leading him from one discovery to the next, but never forcing him. It was patient, like a teacher who understood that growth happened slowly, quietly, without urgency. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Morty noticed a faint shimmer at the far end of the garage. It was subtle, like the last thread of light in a closed room, but it drew him forward. The fragment hovered near the shimmer, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. Morty reached out and touched it, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. He felt a gentle warmth spread through his hands, up his arms, and into his chest. It wasn't magic in the flashy sense. It was something quieter, something profound, the realization that small, attentive actions could create connection, could nurture life, could carry love across spaces both big and small. He sank to the floor, letting the fragment settle near him, its light soft and comforting. Morty thought about the fractured universes Rick often mentioned, about adventures that spanned galaxies and realities, and realized that some journeys were just as important if they happened quietly within the small spaces of a single room. He could feel growth happening inside him, subtle but undeniable, like a slow pulse in the rhythm of his being. And as the garage darkened with the coming night, Morty leaned back against a crate and let himself breathe fully, deeply, with no need to move or understand. The fragment pulsed one last time, hovering close, as if to say that being present, noticing, caring, that was the adventure. The journey, the quiet heroism of this day. And somewhere, in that soft glow, Morty felt a thread of connection to Rick, to the fractured universe, and to something infinitely larger, patient and gentle. Waiting for him to see it fully, he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the fragment wash over him, carrying the quiet lessons of observation, care, and slow discovery into the spaces of his mind. And in that gentle, unhurried moment, he felt ready for whatever soft, strange wonders tomorrow might bring. By the time evening fell, the garage had grown familiar in a way that felt comforting rather than mundane. The fragment floated lazily above the workbench, pulsing softly, and Morty realized he no longer needed to chase it. It seemed content to guide him gently, almost like a companion that understood his pace, his hesitations, his quiet curiosity. The shadows of the room stretched long across the floor, and in that dim, golden light, every object seemed to hold a memory, a story, or a small piece of wisdom waiting for him to notice. Morty's fingers brushed against a small pile of papers near the corner of the bench. They were old letters, folded and smudged, written in Rick's jagged, hurried scrawl. Morty had seen many of Rick's notes before, filled with schematics, warnings, or sarcastic remarks. But these felt different, softer, more deliberate, as if they had been written for moments like this, for quiet reflection and gentle understanding. He picked one up and unfolded it slowly, letting the paper tremble slightly in his hands. "Morty," it began, "sometimes the universe is a lot quieter than you think. You don't need to hear every answer or fix every problem. Just notice, care, pay attention to the small things, they carry more weight than you imagine." The words hung in the air, not as a demand, but as an invitation. Morty felt warmth rising in his chest, a quiet reassurance that even in the vast, fractured universe Rick often talked about, his presence mattered. He realized that these letters were less about science and adventure, and more about attention, about connection, about understanding the weight of small, gentle actions. He laid the letter down carefully and picked up another. This one was full of strange doodles and diagrams, circles that overlapped, lines that curved and spiraled into themselves. At first glance it seemed chaotic, unintelligible, but as he studied it, Morty noticed patterns, subtle rhythms, like a soft pulse hidden in the paper. The fragment floated closer, its glow illuminating the lines in a way that made them shimmer faintly. Morty understood, without needing words, that there was wisdom in observation, in following the soft currents of thought, in noticing the invisible threads that connected everything. As he flipped through more letters, Morty began to feel the presence of Rick in a way he hadn't before. Not as the loud, chaotic figure of wild experiments and interdimensional travel, but as someone quietly attentive, someone who had taken the time to leave pieces of himself behind, little fragments of guidance and care for him to find. The letters weren't instructions. They weren't demands. They were soft, deliberate gestures of love, a kind of communication that didn't shout, but whispered, urging Morty to grow quietly, patiently, thoughtfully. One letter in particular caught his eye. It was folded in a small, precise triangle, sealed with a faintly smudged emblem. Morty opened it carefully and read, "Sometimes you'll feel small. That's okay. Small things have their own strength. Like the pulse of a fragment, like the whisper of a shadow, like noticing a moment before it slips away. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is gentle and quiet and invisible to everyone else." Morty's chest tightened slightly at the words, and he felt a soft wave of understanding wash over him. The fractured universe Rick often spoke of wasn't just vast and dangerous. It was intricate, delicate, and full of moments that mattered only if you noticed them. And Morty realized that the letters were teaching him that quiet courage, patience, and attention were as important as any daring adventure. He folded the letter back carefully and placed it atop the small pile. The fragment hovered above, pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. Morty felt a strange kinship with it, as if it were a small mirror of his own growing awareness, reflecting the lessons he was learning in soft light and gentle hums. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the warmth of understanding settle into his chest, letting the garage, the fragment, and the fading sunlight wrap around him like a soft blanket. Morty thought about his family as he read the letters. Beth, Jerry, Summer. He realized he didn't always understand them, and they didn't always understand him, but there was a quiet bond in noticing, in caring, in small gestures that didn't demand recognition. Rick's letters echoed that same truth. They were less about solving problems and more about acknowledging existence, about connecting with people, objects, and fragments of life in subtle, meaningful ways. The afternoon slipped slowly into evening. Morty wandered to the small, secret room he had discovered, carrying a few letters with him. The motes of light floated lazily, and the fragment pulsed gently as if greeting him. He set the letters down on the floor, and for a long while he just watched, breathing slowly, letting himself absorb the rhythm of the lights, the pulse of the fragment and the warmth that filled the quiet room. He realized, softly, that Rick had left him more than instructions or inventions. He had left him a way of seeing, a way of existing in the fractured universe with awareness and care. Each letter was a reminder that attention mattered, that quiet observation carried weight, that growth happened slowly and subtly, often unnoticed. Morty felt a soft pride rise in him, a gentle acknowledgement of his own progress, of the patience he had cultivated simply by following a small fragment and noticing the world around him. Outside, the sun finally sank behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the garage. The fragment hovered one last time over the letters, pulsing with a faint, steady glow. Morty felt the lessons of the day settle into him like a gentle exhale, a soft hum that would carry him through the night. He didn't need to rush, didn't need to understand everything at once. The universe was patient, and he was learning softly, steadily, deliberately as he lay down in the quiet, letting his mind drift among the floating lights and the fragment's gentle pulse. Morty felt a profound sense of comfort. The letters, the fragment, the shadows, and the soft golden light had all spoken to him without urgency, without pressure, only with care and gentle guidance. And as his eyes closed, he carried with him the quiet knowledge that even small, unseen acts mattered, that growth could be gentle, and that love, in its softest forms, was always present if you paid attention. And, somewhere beyond the edges of his consciousness, he imagined Rick watching, not with loud explanations or frantic gestures, but with a quiet, steady care that had always been there, patiently waiting for Morty to notice it. The fractured universe was vast, strange, and infinite, but in these moments of soft understanding, Morty realized that he could navigate it gently, attentively, and with a heart ready to observe and to care. The following morning, Morty awoke with a quiet sense of anticipation, not the kind that raced through the chest or jittered in the hands, but a soft, humming awareness, like the very air was waiting with him. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in lazy stripes, touching the garage floor with gold that seemed to stretch and yawn. The fragment was already there, hovering above the workbench, pulsing softly, as though greeting him without words. Its gentle glow filled the room with warmth. A quiet reminder that today, like every day, held discoveries to notice. Morty moved slowly, savoring the stretch of his limbs and the familiar weight of the floor beneath his feet. Every step felt deliberate, important, as though the small acts of attention he offered the world could ripple quietly outward. The fragment drifted toward a corner where a pile of discarded tools lay, some rusted, some warped, but all softly shimmering in response to his gaze. Morty knelt, letting his fingers brush across the surfaces, feeling warmth where cold metal should have been. The act was tender, almost intimate, as if simply noticing these things gave them life again. He wandered deeper into the garage than before, past shelves of jars and boxes he had never truly examined. There, behind a stack of old crates, he discovered a small, arched door that had always seemed closed, though he could not remember ever noticing it before. The fragment hovered near the knob, pulsing insistently, softly coaxing him. Morty's hands trembled lightly as he turned the handle. The door swung open with barely a whisper, revealing a space unlike any part of the garage he had known. Inside, the room was weightless in appearance, though the floor supported him solidly. Tiny lights drifted lazily like fireflies, each one glowing in soft, iridescent colors. A faint hum filled the air, comforting and melodic, as if the room itself had its own slow, deliberate heartbeat. Morty stepped inside, letting the lights wash over him. The fragment floated forward, pulsing in gentle arcs that traced patterns in the air, almost like a language without words. Morty felt an unspoken invitation to follow, and so he did, moving with the rhythm of its slow, deliberate dance. The floating lights clustered near objects that reminded Morty of memories he had long since forgotten. A tiny glowing chair reminded him of the summers he spent in his backyard with. Summer, laughing softly as they chased shadows across the grass. A small, suspended sphere pulsed with soft light, echoing the moments he had felt nervous in front of Jessica, but had taken a deep breath and smiled anyway. Morty realized that these objects carried not just memory, but the essence of quiet courage and gentle growth, pieces of himself he had overlooked in the rush of everyday life. The fragment guided him toward a delicate, floating vine that twisted gracefully through the room. Its leaves glowed faintly, and when Morty touched one, it shivered softly under his fingers. The sensation was warm and alive, a subtle reminder that even in strange, unfamiliar spaces, care could create connection. Morty smiled, feeling the weight of this realization settle into his chest. The garden-like room was teaching him that quiet attention. Noticing, holding understanding was a form of growth, perhaps the most profound kind of all. He wandered along the floating vine, letting the motes of light drift past him. Occasionally, the fragment pulsed near his shoulder, a gentle nudge that encouraged him to linger on details, the curve of a leaf, the shimmer of light in the air, the soft, imperceptible hum of objects alive with memory. Morty realized he didn't need to understand everything. He didn't need to solve puzzles or control outcomes. He simply needed to exist, to observe, to allow himself to be part of the subtle rhythm of this universe in miniature. Hours seemed to pass in gentle waves, though he was not aware of time in the usual sense. Morty discovered small creatures living among the lights, tiny beings no larger than a hand that glimmered softly. They floated lazily, moving with deliberate grace, and when they approached him, they radiated a quiet warmth. Morty understood intuitively that they were curious but gentle, and that his own calm presence allowed them to exist comfortably. He smiled softly and whispered greetings that the creatures could not hear, but somehow acknowledged. The moment was delicate, intimate, and infinitely peaceful. The fragment pulsed more brightly as he wandered to the center of the room, where a pool of softly glowing water hovered above the floor. Its surface was like glass, reflecting the drifting lights in fragmented, shimmering patterns. Morty knelt and touched the surface lightly, feeling the warmth ripple through him. He realized that this was not a room meant for adventure in the usual sense. There were no crises to solve, no dangers to escape. Its purpose was quiet reflection, the gentle cultivation of awareness, and the discovery of wonder in subtlety. Morty leaned back against the smooth floor, letting his gaze drift over the room. The fragment hovered nearby, pulsing softly, while the floating lights continued their slow, undulating dance. In this quiet, he felt the hum of growth, of courage, of connection. He realized that even when the world felt fractured or strange, there were spaces like this, soft, intimate, luminous, where one could find patience, love, and understanding without needing to chase or fight. The soft glow of the room shifted as the day outside faded, but Morty felt no urgency to leave. He let himself sink fully into the sensation of stillness, of quiet companionship with the fragment and the floating light. It was a rare, gentle comfort, a reminder that life didn't always have to be loud or chaotic to be meaningful. Sometimes it was enough to exist, to notice, to care. And sometimes that was the greatest adventure of all. As night settled, Morty closed his eyes, imagining the floating garden and the fragment hovering beside him. He felt the lessons of the day resonate in the quiet spaces of his mind. Attention mattered, subtlety was powerful, and growth often unfolded in gentle, unobserved ways. The room pulsed softly, a slow heartbeat of light and warmth, and he let it carry him toward rest, and, somewhere, beyond the edges of the garage and the floating garden, the universe continued its patient rhythm, waiting for those who noticed, who cared, who followed quietly. Deliberately, with hearts open to small wonders, Morty let himself drift, letting the pulse of light and warmth settle into him, knowing that he was part of something vast, gentle, and infinitely tender. The morning arrived slowly, as if the sun itself was reluctant to break through the horizon, casting a soft, honeyed light across the garage. Morty stretched, feeling the gentle pulse of the fragment from the day before still lingering in the corners of his mind. It was subtle, a quiet resonance, but it made him feel grounded, as though the fractured universe he had glimpsed in small fragments was now quietly weaving itself into him. The air was calm, almost expectant, like it knew he would move through it carefully, with intention and patience. Morty wandered toward the secret room, carrying a few small items he had discovered the day before. A letter, a tiny glass sphere, and a scrap of glowing paper. The fragment hovered in front of him, pulsing softly, a silent guide through familiar and unfamiliar spaces alike. He pushed the small arched door open and stepped inside, letting the soft lights wrap around him. The room smelled faintly of ozone and earth, as if the floating lights carried memories from distant places and long-forgotten moments. The motes of light drifted lazily, moving with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. Morty followed them slowly, noticing patterns that he hadn't before. The way the lights clustered near objects that held memories, the subtle shimmer when a fingertip brushed the air, the quiet warmth that filled the room whenever he paused to look carefully. He realized that the space responded to his presence, not in grand gestures, but in subtle, intimate ways. A reminder that attention and care could create resonance in the smallest corners of life. Morty set down the items he had brought and knelt near the glowing sphere. It hovered in the air for a moment before settling softly into his hands, warm and delicate. He felt the fragment pulse near his shoulder, as if acknowledging the care he was giving. The sphere shimmered in response, reflecting the floating lights around him in fragmented, iridescent patterns. Morty understood without thinking that the sphere carried fragments of experience, tiny glimpses of moments lived, lessons learned, and emotions quietly witnessed. He lifted the sphere to his face and let his eyes trace the patterns within. Each shimmer reminded him of small acts of courage, moments of kindness, and times when he had noticed someone or something others had overlooked. He realized that even in the most chaotic or fractured universe, these small, deliberate attentions created connections, invisible, yet undeniably present. The fragment pulsed gently, hovering near his hand, a soft companion in the quiet reflection. Hours passed in this gentle rhythm, the space around him moving with a softness that felt intentional. Morty explored corners he hadn't yet visited, discovering faintly glowing fragments hidden behind floating leaves and under small, suspended vines. He let his fingers brush against them lightly, noticing the subtle warmth and vibration, feeling a deep, unspoken connection with the life held in the tiniest details. It wasn't adventure in the explosive sense, but it was an adventure of attention, awareness, and presence. A journey of quiet growth. Morty found a small nook in the room where a tiny, glowing journal rested. Its pages were filled with sketches, notes, and symbols he didn't fully understand, yet he sensed meaning within them. The fragment hovered above the journal, pulsing with slow encouragement. Morty opened it carefully, noticing the patterns and subtle rhythms that seemed almost alive. Each line, each shape, felt like a whisper, a message urging him to pay attention, to nurture, to observe without expectation. He sat cross-legged on the floor, letting the glow of the lights wash over him, feeling the gentle pulse of the fragment near his chest. Morty realized that growth didn't always happen in grand gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes it happened in quiet moments, in noticing the shimmer of light on a single page, in feeling the subtle warmth of a fragment hovering close, in listening to the soft hum of the universe when no one else was paying attention. A faint breeze drifted through the secret room, though there was no window open. The motes of light wavered slightly in response, and Morty felt a soft shiver of recognition. The room seemed alive, aware of him in a way that was comforting rather than invasive. He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, and let the rhythm of the fragment, the lights and the floating space, settle into him. He felt himself expanding gently into the quiet energy of the room, his mind and heart softening into the pulse of subtle awareness. Morty began to imagine the fragment as a teacher, a guide that didn't demand understanding but offered presence. It moved with him, pulsing with patience, encouraging him to linger, to notice, to experience. Every touch, every glance, every gentle act of curiosity felt like a tiny ritual, a way of participating in the quiet magic of this small universe. He realized that these moments weren't interruptions to life, they were life itself, unfolding in deliberate, tender patterns. The afternoon sun began to wane, and Morty felt the slow approach of evening. The fragment pulsed more steadily, its glow softening into warm amber tones. He picked up the small letter he had carried with him and read it once more. Even in quiet, small things carry weight. Observe, care, notice, let presence be your action. He smiled softly, feeling the gentle truth of the words settle into his chest. He understood more deeply than before that quiet attention could shape reality, cultivate understanding, and foster growth in ways that were subtle but lasting. Morty wandered slowly to the center of the room, letting his gaze drift over the floating lights and vines. The motes of light moved in patterns that seemed deliberate, responding to his presence with subtle acknowledgement. He imagined them as fragments of memory, pieces of the universe he had yet to understand fully, yet that resonated with him in profound ways. He felt an intimate connection to everything in the room, to the lights, the fragments, the floating vines, and even the gentle pulse of the universe beyond the walls. As night fell, the secret room glimmered softly, filled with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Morty lay down on the smooth floor, letting the gentle pulse of the fragment wash over him. He closed his eyes, imagining the small acts of attention, care, and observation he had practiced today, spreading outward like ripples in a still pond. He realized that even in a fractured, chaotic universe, these gentle gestures had weight. They mattered. They shaped the world quietly, persistently, tenderly. And somewhere beyond the walls of the garage, beyond the fragments of reality and light, the universe continued its patient rhythm. Morty felt a soft exhale of understanding settle into him, a quiet recognition that growth, presence, and care often lived in the smallest, most intimate spaces. He let himself drift, carried by the warmth of the fragment, the slow pulse of floating lights, and the gentle hum of awareness that threaded through the room and into his heart. Morning arrived softly, brushing the garage with a quiet golden light that made every object seem slightly more alive than the day before. Morty rose slowly, feeling the gentle hum of the fragment in his chest, a pulse that had become part of the rhythm of his mornings. There was no urgency, no pressure, just the quiet awareness that the world, fractured as it could be, carried tiny fragments of wonder waiting to be noticed. He moved toward the secret room, carrying the journal and a small glass sphere from the day before. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him through spaces that now felt familiar but still full of mystery. Morty realized he had begun to understand the subtle language of the fragment. Not words or commands, but gentle nudges, soft encouragements, the quiet rhythm of attention and care. It was patient, like the universe itself, waiting for him to arrive, fully present. Inside the secret room, the floating lights shimmered lazily, responding to his presence with delicate arcs of color. Morty set the items down carefully, kneeling on the smooth floor as he let his hands hover over the glowing sphere. It quivered slightly, warm and alive, as if it were breathing softly in response to his attention. The fragment pulsed in rhythm with him, a steady companion in a room alive with quiet motion and slow, deliberate energy. He wandered along the floating vine, noticing small new details, a leaf that shimmered faintly when touched, a light mote that drifted lazily but returned when he shifted his gaze, a gentle hum that seemed to echo the pulse of his own heartbeat. Morty felt a growing sense of kinship with the room, as if the space and its subtle motions had always known him and were simply waiting for his attention. He realized that observation was not passive, it was an act of care, a quiet kind of love. Morty's thoughts drifted naturally to his family. He imagined Summer laughing quietly in the sunlight, Beth reading softly at the kitchen table, Jerry fumbling awkwardly but earnestly through his day. And he realized that the same lessons of attention applied to people, noticing, caring, giving space, and observing without judgment created bonds that were subtle but unbreakable. The fragment pulsed near his shoulder, and Morty smiled, sensing that this quiet wisdom extended far beyond the secret room or the glowing sphere. He opened the journal again, letting his fingers trace the soft, intricate sketches and patterns. Each curve, each spiral, seemed to carry meaning that didn't need explanation. Morty realized that understanding didn't always require comprehension in words. Sometimes it was a matter of feeling, of presence, of letting one's attention linger. The fragment hovered above the journal, pulsing steadily, as if affirming that this slow, gentle engagement was enough. Hours passed softly, marked only by the shift in light and the gentle hum of the space. Morty explored corners he hadn't noticed before, discovering floating fragments that shimmered faintly when his gaze landed on them. He touched one carefully, feeling warmth ripple through his fingers, a subtle echo of presence and attention. Another moted light drifted near him, brushing against his arm, and he realized that these gentle gestures of observation could cultivate connection in the quietest, most delicate ways. The fragment guided him to a small, floating mirror at the edge of the room. Morty knelt before it and gazed into its surface. At first, he saw only himself, blinking slowly under the gentle glow of the lights. But then, as he continued to watch, he noticed the subtle pulse of memory, reflection, and growth moving across the surface. The mirror seemed to capture more than appearance. It held the quiet evolution of moments, the accumulation of small acts of attention, and the slow shaping of who he was becoming. Morty realized, softly, that the fragment, the sphere, the journal, and even the floating lights were not just objects, but companions in learning to be present. They were reminders that growth did not always require spectacle, danger, or urgency. Sometimes it was a matter of noticing, of holding space, of moving carefully through the world with attention and care. He felt a deep gratitude settle into his chest, a warm pulse that mirrored the fragment hovering near him. He drifted to the edge of the room, letting his fingers brush against the floating vines and the small, glowing lights. Each touch was deliberate, unhurried, a soft affirmation that even the smallest gestures mattered. The room seemed to respond in kind. The lights shimmered faintly, the vines shifted slightly, and the fragment pulsed in steady rhythm. Morty understood that this was a conversation without words, a dialogue of attention and awareness, patience and care. As afternoon faded, he picked up the journal and began to draw gently on its blank pages. He didn't worry about meaning or precision, only about the soft rhythm of creation, letting his attention flow into shapes, lines, and patterns. The fragment hovered close, pulsing softly, a gentle witness to his quiet expression. Morty realized that even small acts of creativity, when approached with mindfulness and care, held weight and resonance far beyond their apparent simplicity. The room began to darken as the sun dipped lower, but Morty felt no rush to leave. He lay down on the smooth floor, letting the gentle glow of the fragment and the floating lights wash over him. He felt the warmth of his growing understanding settle in his chest, a quiet affirmation that attention, care, and presence were themselves forms of heroism. The fractured universe might be vast and strange, but in small, intimate spaces he had found connection, patience, and quiet strength. Morty let his thoughts drift, imagining the small acts of attention and care spreading outward from the secret room into the world beyond. He thought of the smiles he could notice, the moments of empathy he could offer, the gentle patience he could extend. Even in chaos, he realized, these soft gestures had meaning. They shaped reality quietly but persistently, leaving traces of warmth and understanding that could ripple farther than any explosion or dramatic adventure. As night fell fully, Morty closed his eyes, letting the pulse of the fragment and the gentle rhythm of the room carry him into calm reflection. He felt the weight of the day settle softly into him, a slow, deliberate integration of awareness and tenderness. He understood that the fractured universe was not only vast, but intimate, and that even small acts of attention and care created ripples that mattered profoundly. Somewhere beyond the walls of the garage, the universe moved in patient rhythm. Morty let himself drift into sleep, cradled by the fragment's glow and the soft pulse of the secret room. He realized that the quiet heroism of noticing, of being present, and of caring gently would guide him in ways no adventure could fully predict. And with that, he let his mind rest, full of warmth, reflection, and the gentle, unhurried knowledge that growth was alive in every small, delicate space he had learned to hold. The morning light crept slowly into the garage, filtering through the blinds in soft, golden stripes that made every surface shimmer faintly. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, feeling the gentle pulse of the fragment that had become his constant companion. It hovered nearby, warm and steady, as though greeting him with quiet reassurance. There was no urgency, no rush, only the deliberate rhythm of attention and presence, the kind that made even ordinary objects feel alive. Morty wandered through the familiar spaces of the garage, letting his fingers brush across tools, papers, and jars. Each object responded subtly, humming faintly under his touch. He realized with a soft sort of awe that this quiet attention, noticing, holding, feeling, created a resonance that stretched beyond the immediate, beyond the visible. It was as if care itself had weight, shaping the world gently, persistently. Without demands or expectation, the fragment floated ahead, pulsing slowly, guiding Morty toward a part of the garage he rarely visited. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunbeams, catching the light and scattering it like tiny, suspended stars. Morty paused to watch them, letting the slow dance of particles sink into his awareness. He felt a gentle contentment in simply observing, in being fully present, without needing to do, fix, or understand. The universe, fractured as it could be, seemed to breathe with him in this quiet, patient way. He found a small, forgotten drawer tucked beneath a workbench. It was filled with tiny, delicate items, fragments of glass, twisted wires, old keys, and faintly glowing stones. Morty picked them up carefully, letting each one rest in his hands. The fragment hovered near his shoulder, pulsing softly, a companion in this intimate exploration. He felt a connection to the objects, to the space, to the subtle currents of attention and care threading through them. Each small piece held a story, a memory, or a whisper of possibility. Morty noticed a tiny, folded note at the bottom of the drawer. Its edges were frayed, and the handwriting was delicate, almost hesitant. He opened it slowly and read, "The universe is quiet, Morty. Its pulse is slow, its gestures subtle. You don't need to rush. Notice, care, let attention be your courage. He smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the words settle into his chest. It was another gentle reminder that quiet presence carried meaning, that even the smallest acts of observation had weight in the fabric of reality. He wandered toward the center of the garage, carrying the note and a few of the small items he had discovered. The fragment drifted alongside, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Morty imagined the spaces around him as layers of stories, threads of memory and experience that existed quietly, waiting for someone to notice them. He felt a soft, profound sense of connection, not just to the objects, but to the slow, patient pulse of life itself, and to the fractured universe beyond the walls. Hours passed in soft, deliberate rhythms. Morty explored corners he hadn't yet visited, discovering tiny motes of light, faintly glowing patterns on the walls, and objects that seemed to hum faintly in response to his attention. He realized that the fragment's presence was not merely guidance, it was companionship. It pulsed in acknowledgement, a gentle affirmation that observation, care, and presence were themselves meaningful. Morty felt a subtle pride, a soft awareness that he was learning to navigate the world in a way that was deliberate, patient, and tender. At some point, Morty discovered a small mirror tucked behind a stack of crates. Its surface was slightly warped, reflecting the garage and the floating lights in fragmented patterns. He knelt before it, letting his fingers hover over the glass. At first, he saw only himself blinking in the soft light. But then, as he continued to watch, he noticed subtle traces of memory, growth, and quiet courage reflected in the surface. The mirror seemed to capture more than appearance. It held the evolution of moments, small acts of awareness, and the gentle shaping of who he was becoming. He lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover close. The floating lights drifted lazily above him, shimmering in slow, deliberate patterns. Morty felt the warmth of quiet reflection settle into his chest. He realized that growth did not always announce itself with dramatic gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes it unfolded in subtle, unnoticed ways. In observation, care, gentle attention, and the willingness to linger. Even in small spaces, Morty's thoughts wandered to his family, to Summer, Beth, and even Jerry. He imagined the ways he could bring the lessons of attention and care into his everyday life. Noticing smiles, listening without distraction, offering quiet reassurance. He understood that these small, deliberate gestures could create bonds as profound as any adventure across galaxies. The fragment pulsed steadily near his hand, affirming that presence, patience, and gentle observation were themselves acts of quiet heroism. As the afternoon light waned, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, noticing subtle changes in the floating lights. Some drifted lazily toward him, brushing his fingertips as they passed, while others shifted in arcs that mirrored his own movements. He realized that the room, the fragment, and the lights were not separate from him. They were part of a rhythm he was learning to join, a slow, patient pulse of attention, care, and quiet growth. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread gently through him, a reminder that even in the fractured universe, there were moments of coherence, connection, and gentle beauty. Morty felt the soft hum of the fragment deepen, and he understood that presence and observation were themselves threads that tied him to the world, to Rick, and to the universe's subtle, patient pulse. As night settled over the garage, Morty lay back fully, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above him, their gentle shimmer like tiny stars in a slow, intimate sky. Morty closed his eyes, letting the warmth of attention, care, and presence wash over him. He felt the quiet heroism of noticing, of being fully present, and of cultivating connection in subtle ways, and it resonated softly within him. He imagined the soft pulse of the universe, the slow rhythm of light, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that even in a fractured, chaotic universe, quiet attention and deliberate care had meaning. They shaped reality in subtle, persistent ways, leaving traces of warmth, awareness, and gentle growth. And in that awareness he found comfort, courage, and peace. Morty drifted into rest, carried by the pulse of the fragment and the gentle shimmer of floating lights. He felt a deep, intimate connection to the slow rhythm of life around him, the quiet courage that resided in patience and care, and the tender weight of noticing. And somewhere beyond the walls of the garage, the universe moved with its patient, gentle rhythm, waiting for those who took the time to observe, to care, and to be present. And with that, Morty let himself drift fully into calm, knowing that quiet attention, deliberate care, and gentle presence were themselves a form of adventure, heroism, and love. The morning unfolded with a quiet slowness, the kind that makes even familiar spaces feel like new worlds. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, stretching carefully as the fragment pulsed gently near his shoulder. Its soft glow filled the garage with warmth, and the familiar hum seemed almost musical, a lullaby of presence and attention. He felt grounded, aware of each small movement, each breath, each heartbeat, as if the universe itself had slowed to match his pace. Morty moved through the garage, letting his fingers brush across tools, papers, and jars with deliberate care. Each object seemed to hum faintly, responding to his attention with subtle warmth. He realized, again, that noticing the smallest details carried weight, a quiet resonance that extended beyond immediate perception. The fractured universe, which had once felt overwhelming, now seemed filled with spaces that invited observation, reflection, and gentle participation. The fragment hovered ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him toward the far corner of the garage. Dust motes floated in the sunbeams like tiny, suspended stars, drifting lazily but with purpose. Morty paused, letting the slow dance of particles sink into him. In this quiet, he felt the familiar comfort of presence without urgency, an understanding that growth, attention, and care did not need noise or drama to exist fully. He discovered a small shelf tucked behind a stack of crates, lined with fragments of glass, faded notes, and faintly glowing stones. Morty picked up a tiny shard of glass and held it in his hand. The fragment pulsed near him, almost like a heartbeat in tandem with his own. He noticed the warmth that radiated from the shard. Subtle but real, a gentle reminder that even small, overlooked things contained essence, memory, and quiet life. Among the items, Morty found a small, folded note. Its edges were frayed, and the handwriting was careful, almost tentative. He unfolded it slowly and read, "Courage is quiet, Morty. It lives in attention, in care, in the moments you choose to notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence be your guide." Morty felt the warmth of the words settle into his chest. It was another gentle whisper, affirming the quiet growth he had been experiencing. He wandered slowly through the garage, carrying the note and a few small items he had gathered. The fragment drifted alongside him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Morty imagined the garage as a web of stories, memories, and experiences waiting to be noticed. Each object, each shadow, each beam of sunlight carried the potential for quiet understanding. He realized that simply being present and observing these details was itself a form of heroism, subtle but profound. Hours passed in a gentle rhythm. Morty explored corners he had not yet visited, discovering tiny lights, soft hums, and objects that seemed to vibrate faintly in response to his attention. The fragment pulsed near him like a gentle affirmation, a reminder that noticing, caring, and being present were meaningful acts. Morty felt a quiet pride, a soft understanding that his small gestures of attention and care shaped the world around him, creating a resonance that persisted in subtle, persistent ways. He came across a small mirror tucked beneath a workbench. Its surface was slightly warped, reflecting the garage and the floating lights in delicate, fragmented patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. At first, he saw only himself blinking in the soft morning light. But then he noticed subtle traces of memory, growth, and courage reflected in the surface, evidence of the quiet evolution of his own presence. The mirror seemed to capture more than appearance. It held the delicate shaping of awareness, care, and patience. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near him. The floating lights above drifted lazily, shimmering in slow arcs of color. He felt warmth and calm settle into him, the quiet assurance that growth did not always announce itself with dramatic gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it unfolded subtly, gently, in the small, unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and caring. These were the moments that mattered most, the ones that shaped who he was becoming in ways that words could barely capture. His thoughts drifted to his family. Summer laughing in the sunlight, Beth reading at the kitchen table, Jerry fumbling awkwardly but earnestly through his day. Morty realized that the same principles applied to people, noticing without judgment, listening without interruption, and offering gentle presence could form bonds as profound as any adventure through space and time. The fragment pulsed steadily near his hand, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism. As afternoon waned, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, letting his fingers brush the floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, a gentle acknowledgement of connection and presence. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily as if reflecting his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the floating lights were not separate from him. They were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit, slow, patient, and deliberate. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. The warmth spread through him, a reminder that even in the fractured universe, coherence, connection, and beauty persisted in quiet, intimate forms. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with the soft rhythm of his own presence. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were themselves threads that tied him to the world, to Rick, and to the subtle patterns of life. Night settled over the garage, and Morty lay down fully on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above him like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of awareness, attention, and gentle presence wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, being present, and cultivating understanding ripple softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate gestures of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the pulse of the universe, the soft shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the slow rhythm of life, the quiet courage of attention, and the tender weight of noticing were forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into calm, surrounded by warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of quiet presence. Morning arrived slowly, spreading soft light across the garage in gentle, deliberate streaks. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, feeling the steady pulse of the fragment hovering near him. Its gentle glow bathed the space in warmth, a quiet companion in the unfolding day. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow rhythm of presence, awareness, and soft reflection that had become familiar to him. Morty wandered through the garage, letting his fingers brush across the scattered tools, jars, and papers. Each object seemed to hum faintly, responding to his careful attention. He realized again that noticing, holding, and observing created resonance. The fractured universe, which had once felt confusing and overwhelming, now appeared full of intimate spaces that invited reflection and gentle interaction. Presence, he thought, was its own kind of adventure. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding Morty toward a section of the garage he rarely explored. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight, moving with a slow, quiet rhythm. Morty paused to watch them, letting their gentle motion sink into his awareness. In this silence, he understood that growth, understanding, and courage often appeared in subtle gestures, small acts of attention, and the willingness to be present. He discovered a low shelf hidden behind a stack of crates, filled with delicate fragments, glowing stones, tiny shards of glass, and faded notes. Morty picked up one of the shards, feeling its warmth ripple gently through his fingers. The fragment hovered near him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, a soft affirmation that even the smallest objects carried meaning, memory, and quiet life. Each piece seemed to whisper stories of patience, care, and gentle courage. Among the items, Morty found a small, folded note. Its edges were frayed, and the handwriting was careful and tentative. He opened it slowly, reading. "Strength is quiet, Morty. It lives in attention, care, and the moments when you notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence guide you." Morty smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the words settle into his chest. It was another gentle confirmation that the path he was learning, slow, deliberate, patient, held its own quiet heroism. He wandered through the garage with the note in hand, carrying a few small fragments from the shelf. The fragment floated beside him, pulsing in steady rhythm, a companion in exploration and observation. Morty imagined the garage as a web of quiet stories, memories, and moments waiting to be noticed. Every object, shadow, and beam of light offered the potential for subtle understanding, gentle connection, and slow growth. Hours passed quietly. Morty explored corners he had never seen before, discovering floating lights, soft hums, and objects that seemed to vibrate faintly when observed. He realized that the fragment's presence was not only guidance, but companionship. Its pulse affirmed the value of noticing, caring, and being present, and Morty felt a growing awareness that even the smallest gestures of attention shaped the world subtly but meaningfully. He came upon a small mirror tucked behind a workbench. Its surface was warped slightly, reflecting the garage and floating lights in delicate, fragmented patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. Initially, he saw only himself blinking in the soft morning light. But as he continued to watch, he noticed traces of memory, growth, and courage reflected in the surface, evidence of the quiet evolution of his presence. The mirror held more than appearance. It held the shaping of awareness, patience, and care. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near him. The floating lights drifted lazily above, shimmering in slow, deliberate arcs. He felt warmth and calm settle into him, the quiet assurance that growth did not require dramatic gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes it unfolded subtly in the unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and attending. These were the moments that mattered most, shaping him in ways that words could scarcely capture. Thoughts of his family drifted through him. Summer, laughing softly in sunlight, Beth reading at the kitchen table, Jerry fumbling through his day with gentle sincerity. Morty realized that these quiet principles applied to people too, noticing without judgment, listening without distraction, and offering presence cultivated bonds as profound as any galactic adventure. The fragment pulsed steadily near him, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism. As afternoon waned, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, brushing his fingers along floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, an intimate acknowledgement of connection. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily as if mirroring his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the floating lights were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit. Patient, slow, and deliberate. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread through him, a gentle reminder that even in a fractured universe, coherence, connection, and beauty persisted in subtle, intimate forms. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with the rhythm of his own presence. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were threads tying him to the world, to Rick, and to the subtle patterns of life that often went unnoticed. Night fell fully over the garage, and Morty lay down on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of attention, awareness, and gentle presence to wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, of being present, and of cultivating understanding ripples softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate gestures of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the slow pulse of the universe, the gentle shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the rhythm of life, the courage of quiet attention, and the tender weight of noticing were forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into rest, cradled by warmth, reflection, and the gentle, persistent presence of subtle care. The morning light spilled slowly into the garage, soft and golden, brushing over every surface with a quiet intimacy. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, stretching gently as the fragment pulsed near his shoulder. Its glow was warm and steady, a calm companion in the slow unfolding of the day. There was no urgency, no pressure, only the gentle rhythm of awareness, reflection, and deliberate presence. Morty wandered through the garage, letting his fingers brush across jars, tools, and scattered papers. Each object seemed to hum faintly under his touch, responding to his careful attention. He realized again that noticing small things, holding them lightly in his awareness, and observing quietly created subtle resonance. Even in the fractured universe, there were intimate spaces that invited care, reflection, and gentle engagement. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him toward a corner of the garage he rarely visited. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight, drifting as if caught in their own private rhythm. Morty paused to watch them, letting their slow dance sink into him. In the quiet, he understood that growth, courage, and understanding often appeared not in spectacle, but in subtle gestures, small acts of attention, and the willingness to simply be present. He discovered a small, forgotten shelf tucked behind a stack of crates, lined with delicate fragments, glowing stones, tiny shards of glass, and faded notes. Morty picked up a tiny shard, feeling warmth ripple gently through his fingers. The fragment pulsed near him, a heartbeat in tandem with his own. Even the smallest objects carried essence, memory, and quiet life. Each seemed to whisper stories of patience, care, and gentle courage waiting to be noticed. Among the items, he found a folded note, its edges frayed and handwriting delicate. Morty opened it carefully, reading, "Courage is quiet, Morty. It lives in attention, care, and the moments when you notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence guide you." The words settled warmly into his chest, a gentle affirmation that the slow, deliberate path he had been following was itself meaningful, heroic in its quiet persistence. He carried the note and a few small fragments as he wandered through the garage. The fragment floated beside him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, a companion in this intimate exploration. Morty imagined the garage as a tapestry of quiet stories, moments, and experiences waiting to be noticed. Every object, shadow, and beam of sunlight contained the potential for subtle understanding, gentle connection, and patient growth. Hours passed in soft, deliberate rhythms. Morty explored corners he had not yet visited, discovering floating lights, faint hums, and objects that vibrated faintly in response to his attention. The fragment's pulse was a quiet affirmation, reminding him that noticing, caring, and being present were acts of meaning and courage. Morty felt a gentle pride, a soft understanding that even the smallest gestures of attention shaped the world subtly yet persistently. He came upon a small mirror tucked behind a workbench, its surface slightly warped, reflecting the garage and floating lights in fragmented, delicate patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. At first, he saw only himself blinking in the soft morning glow. But gradually, he noticed traces of memory, growth, and quiet courage reflected in the surface, evidence of his evolution in the slow, deliberate practice of presence. The mirror captured more than appearance. It captured awareness, patience, and gentle care. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover close. The floating lights drifted above, shimmering in slow, deliberate arcs. Warmth and calm settled into him as he realized that growth did not always appear with dramatic gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it unfolded subtly, quietly, in the unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and attending. These were the moments that mattered most, shaping him in ways words could not capture. Thoughts of his family drifted through him. Summer laughing softly in sunlight, Beth reading at the kitchen table, Jerry fumbling through his day with honest effort. Morty understood that these quiet principles applied to people as well. Noticing without judgment, listening without distraction, and offering gentle presence cultivated bonds as profound as any cosmic adventure. The fragment pulsed steadily, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism in their own right. As afternoon waned, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, brushing his fingers along the floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of connection. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily, reflecting his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the lights were not separate from him. They were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit. Slow, deliberate, patient, and tender. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread through him, a reminder that even in a fractured universe, coherence, connection, and quiet beauty persisted. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with his own rhythm. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were threads tying him to the world, to Rick, and to the subtle patterns of life that often went unseen. Night settled fully over the garage, and Morty lay down on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above him like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of attention, presence, and gentle awareness to wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, being present, and cultivating understanding ripple softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate acts of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the pulse of the universe, the soft shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the rhythm of life, the courage of quiet attention, and the tender weight of noticing were themselves forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into rest, cradled by warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of subtle care. The morning unfolded with a soft glow, the kind that makes shadows feel gentle and light feel intimate. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, stretching slowly as the fragment pulsed near him. Its warm, steady glow filled the garage, a calm companion in the quiet rhythm of the day. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow unfolding of awareness and reflection, the kind that carried meaning without drama. Morty moved through the garage, letting his fingers brush across jars, tools, and scattered papers. Each object seemed to hum faintly under his touch, responding to his careful attention. He realized that noticing small details, holding them lightly in awareness, and observing without expectation created subtle resonance. Even in a fractured universe, there were spaces that invited reflection, presence, and gentle care. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him toward a corner he had not yet fully explored. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight, caught in the slow dance of light and shadow. Morty paused to watch them, letting their motion sink into him. In this quiet he understood that growth, courage, and understanding often appeared in subtle gestures, small acts of attention, and the willingness to simply be present. He discovered a low shelf hidden behind a stack of crates, filled with delicate fragments, glowing stones, tiny shards of glass, and faded notes. Morty picked up a shard, feeling its warmth ripple gently through his fingers. The fragment hovered near him, pulsing in tandem with his heartbeat. Even the smallest objects carried essence, memory, and quiet life. Each seemed to whisper stories of patience, care, and subtle courage waiting to be noticed. Among the items, Morty found a folded note, its edges frayed, and handwriting careful, almost hesitant. He opened it slowly and read, "Courage is quiet, Morty. It lives in attention, care, and the moments when you notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence guide you." The words settled warmly into his chest, a gentle affirmation that the slow, deliberate path he had been following was itself meaningful, heroic in its quiet persistence. He wandered through the garage, carrying the note and a few small fragments from the shelf. The fragment floated beside him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Morty imagined the garage as a web of quiet stories, moments, and experiences waiting to be noticed. Every object, shadow, and beam of sunlight offered potential for subtle understanding, gentle connection, and patient growth. Hours passed in slow, deliberate rhythms. Morty explored corners he had never visited before, discovering floating lights, soft hums, and objects that vibrated faintly in response to his attention. The fragment's pulse was a quiet affirmation, reminding him that noticing, caring, and being present were acts of meaning and courage. Morty felt gentle pride, a soft understanding that even the smallest gestures of attention shaped the world subtly yet persistently. He came across a small mirror tucked behind a workbench, its surface warped slightly, reflecting the garage and floating lights in delicate, fragmented patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. Initially, he saw only himself, blinking in the soft morning glow. But gradually, he noticed subtle traces of memory, growth, and quiet courage reflected in the surface, evidence of the slow evolution of his own presence. The mirror held more than appearance. It captured awareness, patience, and gentle care. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near him. The floating lights drifted lazily above, shimmering in arcs of color. Warmth and calm settled into him as he realized that growth did not always appear with dramatic gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it unfolded quietly, in unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and attending. These were the moments that mattered most, shaping him in ways words could barely capture. His thoughts drifted to his family. Summer laughing softly in sunlight, Beth reading quietly at the kitchen table, Jerry fumbling through his day with gentle sincerity. Morty realized that these quiet principles applied to people as well, noticing without judgment, listening without distraction, and offering presence cultivated bonds as profound as any cosmic adventure. The fragment pulsed steadily near his hand, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism. As afternoon faded, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, brushing his fingers along floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of connection. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily, reflecting his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the floating lights were not separate from him. They were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit, slow, deliberate, patient, and tender. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread through him, a reminder that even in a fractured universe, coherence, connection, and quiet beauty persisted in subtle, intimate forms. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with his own rhythm. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were threads tying him to the world, to Rick, and to the subtle patterns of life often unseen. Night fell over the garage, and Morty lay fully on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of attention, presence, and gentle awareness to wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, being present, and cultivating understanding ripples softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate acts of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the pulse of the universe, the soft shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the rhythm of life, the courage of quiet attention, and the tender weight of noticing were themselves forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into rest, cradled by warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of subtle care. The morning light entered the garage softly, brushing over every surface with warmth and quiet intimacy. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, stretching slowly as the fragment pulsed gently near his shoulder. Its steady glow filled the space like a calm heartbeat, a companion in the unhurried rhythm of the day. There was no urgency, no expectation, only the gentle unfolding of awareness and reflection. Morty moved through the garage, letting his fingers brush across jars, scattered papers, and old tools. Each object seemed to hum faintly under his touch, responding to his deliberate attention. He realized once again that noticing, holding lightly, and observing without pressure created resonance. Even in a fractured universe, there were intimate spaces that invited care, reflection, and gentle connection. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him toward a corner of the garage he had not yet fully explored. Dust motes drifted slowly in the sunlight, moving as if they had their own subtle rhythm. Morty paused, letting their quiet dance settle into him. In the stillness, he understood that courage, growth, and understanding often revealed themselves not in spectacle, but in subtle gestures, small acts of attention, and the willingness to simply be present. He discovered a low shelf tucked behind a stack of crates, lined with delicate fragments, tiny shards of glass, glowing stones and faded, careful notes. Morty picked up a shard, feeling warmth ripple gently through his fingers. The fragment hovered nearby, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Even the smallest objects carried essence, memory, and quiet life, whispering stories of patience, care, and understated courage waiting to be noticed. Among the items, he found a folded note, its edges frayed and handwriting delicate. Morty opened it slowly and read, "Quiet strength, Morty, is in attention, in care, and in moments you notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence guide your steps." The words settled warmly into his chest, a soft reminder that the slow, deliberate path he was walking was itself meaningful, heroic in its quiet persistence. Morty wandered through the garage, holding the note and a few small fragments from the shelf. The fragment floated beside him, pulsing gently, a companion in his quiet exploration. He imagined the garage as a tapestry of subtle stories, moments, and experiences waiting to be noticed. Every object, shadow, and beam of sunlight held the potential for gentle understanding, patient growth, and tender connection. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. Morty explored corners he had never seen before, discovering floating lights, soft hums, and objects that seemed to vibrate faintly when observed. The fragment pulsed steadily, affirming that noticing, caring, and being present were meaningful, courageous acts. Morty felt a quiet pride, a gentle understanding that even the smallest gestures shaped the world subtly yet persistently. He came upon a small mirror tucked behind a workbench. Its surface was slightly warped, reflecting the garage and floating lights in delicate, fragmented patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. At first, he saw only himself, blinking in the soft morning glow. But gradually, he noticed traces of memory, growth, and quiet courage reflected back, evidence of the slow evolution of his presence. The mirror held more than appearance. It captured awareness, patience, and tender care. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near him. The floating lights drifted lazily above, shimmering in soft arcs. Warmth and calm settled into him as he realized growth did not always come with dramatic gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it unfolded quietly, in unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and attending. These were the moments that mattered most, shaping him in ways words could barely touch. Thoughts of his family came softly. Summer laughing in sunlight, Beth reading quietly, Jerry fumbling through the day with honest effort. Morty understood that these principles applied to people as well. Noticing without judgment, listening without distraction, and offering gentle presence could form bonds as profound as any cosmic adventure. The fragment pulsed steadily near him, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism. As afternoon waned, Morty moved to the edge of the secret room, brushing his fingers along floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of connection. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily, reflecting his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the floating lights were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit. Patient, slow, and tender. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread through him, a reminder that even in a fractured universe, coherence, connection, and subtle beauty persisted. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with his own rhythm. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were threads that tied him to the world, to Rick, and to the intricate patterns of life often unseen. Night settled over the garage, and Morty lay fully on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of attention, presence, and gentle awareness to wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, being present, and cultivating understanding ripples softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate acts of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the pulse of the universe, the soft shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the rhythm of life, the courage of quiet attention, and the tender weight of noticing were themselves forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into rest, cradled by warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of subtle care. The morning arrived with a gentle hush, the kind that made even familiar spaces feel entirely new. Morty rose from the smooth floor of the secret room, stretching slowly as the fragment pulsed softly near his shoulder. Its warmth filled the garage, a companion in the quiet rhythm of the day. There was no hurry, no expectation, only the slow unfolding of attention, awareness, and gentle reflection. He moved through the garage, letting his fingers brush across scattered papers, jars, and tools. Each object seemed to hum faintly, responding to his deliberate observation. Morty realized again that noticing, holding lightly, and observing without pressure created resonance. Even in a fractured universe, spaces existed that invited reflection, care, and quiet connection. The fragment floated ahead, pulsing softly, guiding him toward a corner of the garage he had not yet fully explored. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight, caught in a slow private dance. Morty paused to watch them, letting their gentle motion settle into him. In this quiet, he understood that courage, growth, and understanding often appeared not in spectacle, but in subtle gestures, small acts of attention, and the willingness to simply be present. He discovered a low shelf tucked behind a stack of crates, filled with delicate fragments, tiny shards of glass, softly glowing stones, and faded notes. Morty picked up a shard, feeling warmth ripple gently through his fingers. The fragment hovered near him, pulsing in tandem with his heartbeat. Even the smallest objects carried essence, memory, and quiet life, whispering stories of patience, care, and subtle courage waiting to be noticed. Among the items, he found a folded note, its edges frayed and handwriting careful, almost hesitant. Morty opened it slowly and read, "Quiet strength, Morty, is in attention, in care, and in moments you notice without needing to act loudly. Let presence guide your steps." The words settled warmly into his chest, a gentle affirmation that the slow, deliberate path he was following was itself meaningful, heroic in its quiet persistence. He wandered through the garage, holding the note and a few small fragments. The fragment floated beside him, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Morty imagined the garage as a tapestry of subtle stories, moments, and experiences waiting to be noticed. Every object, shadow, and beam of sunlight held potential for gentle understanding, patient growth, and tender connection. Hours passed in soft rhythm. Morty explored corners he had not yet visited, discovering floating lights, faint hums, and objects that vibrated slightly in response to his attention. The fragment pulsed steadily, affirming that noticing, caring, and being present were meaningful, courageous acts. Morty felt a quiet pride, a gentle understanding that even the smallest gestures shaped the world subtly, yet persistently. He came upon a small mirror tucked behind a workbench. Its surface was slightly warped, reflecting the garage and floating lights in delicate, fragmented patterns. Morty knelt before it, letting his fingers hover above the glass. At first, he saw only himself, blinking in the soft morning light. Gradually, he noticed subtle traces of memory, growth, and quiet courage reflected back, evidence of the slow evolution of his presence. The mirror held more than appearance. It captured awareness, patience, and tender care. Morty lay back on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near him. The floating lights drifted lazily above, shimmering in soft arcs. Warmth and calm settled into him as he realized growth did not always appear with dramatic gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it unfolded quietly in unobserved acts of noticing, observing, and attending. These were the moments that mattered most, shaping him in ways words could barely capture. Thoughts of his family drifted softly. Summer laughing in sunlight, Beth reading quietly, Jerry fumbling through his day with honest effort. Morty understood that these principles applied to people as well, noticing without judgment, listening without distraction, and offering gentle presence could form bonds as profound as any cosmic adventure. The fragment pulsed steadily near his hand, affirming that quiet attention and care were acts of courage, love, and heroism. As afternoon waned, Morty wandered to the edge of the secret room, brushing his fingers along floating vines and glowing motes. Each touch was deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of connection. The fragment responded in kind, pulsing steadily, reflecting his awareness back to him. Morty understood that the secret room, the fragment, and the floating lights were part of a rhythm he was learning to inhabit. Slow, deliberate, patient, and tender. He picked up the small, glowing sphere again, letting it rest in his hands. Its warmth spread through him, a reminder that even in a fractured universe, coherence, connection, and subtle beauty persisted. Morty felt the pulse of the fragment deepen, resonating with his own rhythm. He understood that noticing, caring, and observing were threads tying him to the world, to Rick, and to the intricate patterns of life often unseen. Night settled over the garage, and Morty lay fully on the smooth floor, letting the fragment hover near his chest. The floating lights drifted above like tiny, patient stars. He closed his eyes, allowing the warmth of attention, presence, and gentle awareness to wash over him. Morty felt the quiet heroism of noticing, being present, and cultivating understanding ripple softly through him. Even in a fractured, chaotic universe, small, deliberate acts of care shaped reality in persistent, meaningful ways. He imagined the pulse of the universe, the soft shimmer of the lights, and the warmth of the fragment carrying him into calm reflection. Morty understood that the rhythm of life, the courage of quiet attention, and the tender weight of noticing were themselves forms of adventure, heroism, and love. And with that, he let himself drift fully into rest, cradled by warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of subtle care. The evening settled slowly over the garage, soft shadows stretching across familiar corners. Morty lay on the smooth floor of the secret room, the fragment hovering gently above him. Its pulse was steady, warm, and patient, like a heartbeat that matched his own. There was no rush, no need to move or act, only the quiet presence of reflection, awareness, and the gentle unfolding of understanding. Morty gazed at the floating lights drifting above him, small points of calm in the quiet room. Each one shimmered as if carrying a memory, a trace of the days that had passed. He felt a deep sense of completion in the way the fragment pulsed beside him, a rhythm that reminded him of all he had learned: patience, quiet courage, and the power of noticing. His thoughts wandered to Rick, to the fractured universes they had navigated together, to the tiny acts of attention and care that had shaped even the chaos into something recognizable, something intimate. Morty understood that heroism did not always come in dramatic gestures. Sometimes it existed in the gentle act of presence, the quiet attention to the world, and the willingness to carry empathy like a lantern through dark or strange spaces. He reached out slowly, touching the fragment, feeling warmth ripple through his fingers. The glow expanded softly, reflecting the quiet hum of connection that had grown between them. Morty realized that even in a chaotic universe, small acts of understanding, subtle patience, and deliberate care carried significance far beyond what anyone could see. Memories of his family drifted in. Summer's laughter, Beth's quiet attentiveness, Jerry's fumbling attempts at courage. Morty understood that these moments, simple and unassuming, were as vital as any cosmic adventure. They were the threads that connected him to life, to love, and to the enduring rhythm of presence. The fragment pulsed gently in response, affirming the quiet heroism embedded in care, attention, and reflection. Time seemed to stretch and fold in the room. Morty watched the floating lights drifting slowly above, their movement almost hypnotic. He imagined them as tiny stars carrying stories, whispers, and traces of every gentle act he had witnessed or performed. Each pulse of the fragment, each shimmer of light, was a quiet affirmation that growth, understanding, and courage often emerged in subtle, patient ways. He thought back to the notes he had discovered among shards and fragments, words written with care and intention. They had reminded him that courage is quiet, strength is patient, and presence is its own kind of adventure. Morty felt a soft, reflective joy in realizing that he had embodied these lessons in small ways, in noticing, in being present, and in cultivating understanding without expectation. Morty let the warmth of the fragment spread through him fully, feeling it anchor him to the quiet pulse of the universe. Shadows and light shifted softly across the room, and he realized that each movement, each breath, and each gentle observation was part of a larger, intricate rhythm. He was part of it, the lights were part of it, and the fragment's persistent glow was a reminder that subtle connection mattered, that care mattered, and that presence mattered. He closed his eyes, letting memories and reflections drift together like clouds in slow motion. Summer's laughter echoed softly, Beth's voice murmured gently, and Jerry's awkward kindness lingered in warmth. Morty felt the pulse of these moments ripple through him, carrying a gentle sense of fulfillment. Life, he realized, was composed not only of extraordinary events, but of quiet, consistent, tender acts that shaped the heart, mind, and soul. The fragment hovered near his chest, pulsing with the rhythm of his own heart. Morty imagined it as a small star guiding him through the uncharted spaces of thought, memory, and quiet wonder. He understood that even if the fractured universe remained chaotic and unpredictable, there was constancy in noticing, in gentle care, and in reflective presence. These were his quiet victories, his soft triumphs, and his enduring connection to the world around him. As night deepened, Morty allowed himself to drift fully into calm reflection. The floating lights shimmered above like tiny, patient stars, and the fragment pulsed gently beside him. Every thought, memory, and quiet lesson settled into him like a soft exhale. He understood that closure did not require dramatic endings. It existed in the acceptance of what had been, the appreciation of what was, and the gentle awareness that each small act of care left its mark. He thought of Rick and all the adventures they had shared, not in the chaos of explosions or interdimensional chases, but in moments of understanding, shared curiosity, and quiet presence. Morty realized that heroism could be ordinary, ordinary could be extraordinary, and attention could be transformative. Every small gesture, every gentle acknowledgement contributed to the enduring rhythm of life and love. Morty felt a soft smile spread across his face, the fragment's warmth, the floating lights, the lingering echo of laughter and voices. All of it was a quiet affirmation that even in a fractured universe, moments of peace, understanding, and love persisted. He understood that his journey had been less about grandiose feats and more about cultivating awareness, empathy, and patience. The universe itself seemed to breathe with him, in sync with his presence. Night wrapped the garage in its soft embrace. Morty lay fully, letting the fragment hover near him. He imagined it carrying him gently into dreams, where time and space folded tenderly around the quiet moments he had gathered. The floating lights shimmered above, and he felt the enduring pulse of subtle care, quiet attention, and gentle courage settle into him completely. And in that quiet, reflective space, Morty understood that he had learned the most profound lessons of all, that noticing, listening, and being present were themselves acts of love. That quiet heroism was patient, persistent, and deeply transformative, and that the warmth of connection, however subtle, could shape the heart and soul with gentle insistence. He let himself drift fully into calm, wrapped in warmth, reflection, and the gentle persistence of subtle care. The fragment pulsed gently, the lights shimmered above, and a soft peace settled in the room, as if the universe itself acknowledged the quiet completion of this journey. Morty smiled one last time, letting himself exhale into the depth of night. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.